Welcome back, everybody. This is the final session, session number 3 on day 2 of the hearing being run with the combined Wairarapa district plan. Thus far, we've completed hearing from all submitters in person for hearing stream 1. We have agreed to receive some statements from certain submitters who weren't able to be present today, and that includes Karen Rosser for Enviro New Zealand Services, who's going to provide a statement, and Francis Capey from Federated Farmers, who is also going to provide a statement, and in fact may have already emailed that to you recently. Don't think there was anyone else, no. And the requirement for those statements to be produced is the 16th of August. Okay, so the function of this final session is to hear back from the officers in terms of some of the outstanding issues and the way forward in dealing with those in advance of their final right of reply. Hand over to you, Mr. Wesley, to lead us through that.
Just put up on the screen and shared online for those online the questions that we've noted down over the last 2 days that you asked us for, and all that from our own notes of what we consider need to be responded to. So I'll just walk through each one of those with you to confirm it's correct. The first one, and just so you're aware, they're broken down by the topics we've been going through. So strategic direction. Question was, how do the energy chapter and other chapters in the proposed district plan give effect to the national policy statement on renewable electricity generation? In particular, how do the other provisions respond to issues associated with climate change, load, and economy? First one, and Ms. Foster's evidence or hearing statement today adds more to that.
It does.
Next one, following consideration of the above question, should a new objective on renewable energy electricity be added to the climate change resilience section?
Yes.
Having heard the evidence from submitted, particularly the Regional Council on Marine Energy, the new objective to reflect the Mana OTY and the hierarchy of obligations in the NPS freshwater be added to the natural environment section, and then specific references that submitters referred to of sections of the Act or NPS. We recommended to delete being identified as having that wording from objective HC02 relating to tangata whenua identity and values. Does this recommended amendment result in any consequential amendments to other chapters in the proposed plan, and or is it consistent with provisions in other chapters of the proposed district plan, such as sites and areas of significant stability? And does this resolve in an inconsistency within the proposed district plan as notified?
So, Hamish, could you remove the?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Much easier to read.
And subsequent follow-on question, does this resolve an inconsistency within the proposed district plan as notified between this objective and the provisions of the sites of significance to the chapter? And then the question we also were asked, how would this work in practice at a resource level for unidentified sites?
Yes, I think that last sentence should be, does this create or resolve inconsistency? Thank you.
Question 5. It is recommended to add including additional infrastructure, so objective infrastructure 01. The definition of additional infrastructure is in the National Policy Statement Urban Development, refers to social infrastructure. Question was, does the definition of additional infrastructure include marae? And I've just put a note where it referred to implementation guidance. And then from Ms. Foster's evidence today, a question came up, should a definition of additional infrastructure be added to the proposed plan?
Yes. And in relation to that, Ms. Foster was also musing that whether the relief of adding that term would actually give effect to the relief of Enviro Services New Zealand, given that, in her view at least, their activities aren't necessarily covered by the term additional infrastructure.
Yes. So Ms. Rosier commented on that in her evidence, and I was interested to see what in her statement that's due.
We've given leave to Ms Rosier to provide a response to the hearing stream statement by the 16th of August.
So we'll might need to elaborate on that question on whatever additional information comes through. And then the last question on strategic direction was explain the differences in the definitions of infrastructure, additional infrastructure, regionally significant infrastructure, and any other terms referring to infrastructure in the plan. And then are these definitions consistent with higher order planning documents such as the operative regional policy statement, proposed change 1 regional policy statement, and the natural resources plan? And if any inconsistency is identified, how can consistency be resolved? And is there scope and submissions to resolve the inconsistency?
Yes, some indication of where those terms are used in policies and rules would be of assistance also. Sort of an inventory. Might be another question, and I'll let.
Yeah, so the surface water and the potential conflict between the regional council rules and we're looking at
Yes,
rules for discharge into them and so on. So
That's in a different part of the question.
it's been raised as
Yeah.
definition. It's going to include it, and so if I include it, maybe we'll open up a whole can of worms that we don't want to.
Coming up, Alice, though.
Yeah.
Oh,
Different sort of the two reports.
So I thought that was first part. Apologies.
So that was all the questions we had noted down for the strategic direction.
Yep.
So I checked that there was nothing additional.
that's something from me.
So then the procedural matters point. So that was the follow-up to the further submitters who had not responded regarding their status as further submitters.
Yes.
So an email went out yesterday to those parties. So we'll
Thank you for that.
additional follow-up. Well, next. The whole of plan now.
Just before you, so we'll expect a recommendation from you to provide a reply on that.
We'll cover if we have a response, what the response is and our recommendation on that response. And if there's no response, a recommendation on what the status would mean for them as well.
Thank you.
So whole of plan, so having heard the evidence from submitters, including Regional Council and Meridian Energy, do we, in terms of the reporting officers, consider the district councils and district plan have a residual role under section 31 of the RMA to give effect to the national policy statement for freshwater? And we referred to two parts that Ms Foster and Ms Zollner referred to today, and regarding in terms of the integrated approach to managing the effects of subdivision and land use. And then the particular questions, that's the overarching, and does the proposed plan address all the matters in part 3.54 of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater in terms of adverse effects on freshwater from land use and subdivision? Identify the proposed plan provisions that apply an integrated approach to freshwater and land use and subdivision, and are these provisions the most appropriate to achieve the integrated approach to give effect to the NPS?
Yes.
Does that capture?
It does.
And then specific question that was raised, is there scope in the Regional Council submission for the provisions in Ms Zollner's evidence, specifically the new definition of hydraulic neutrality and introductory text?
Yes, I omitted to ask Ms Zollner that question today, but they were the two aspects of the amended relief in purple that be new matters. I have an additional question there, and that is, regardless of the outcome there, is would the would there be, would the water chapter that's been proposed by Mr. Zollner constitute a complete code? And by that I mean, would it suffice as a standalone chapter? It contains some objectives and some policies and 4 rules, but nothing else. And I just wondered how that, whether that is deemed to be, would be deemed to be sufficient for a standalone chapter in a whole of plan sense.
And then last one, what are the proposed plan requirements for hydraulic neutrality, both for permitted land use activities and activities subdivision requiring resource consent? And do the engineering standards apply at the building consent stage?
Yes. Yes. The question there was, and I think the question was what, I got an answer to what is required if a resource consent is required, but the question was what happens if there's no resource consent?
It's permitted activity and
yes,
does that work in practice?
Yes.
So that was everything on the whole of plan, of the primary matter being the 3 waters chapter, being dispute and the related provisions. Then part 1 matters. Consider further the relationship between the strategic direction objectives and objectives in other chapters. As the second sentence in the introductory text of the strategic direction chapter implying the hierarchy between the strategic direction objectives and objectives in other chapters.
Yes, and the reason that came down to the questions that I had from Ms. Robertson regarding retention of the existing wording versus wording by, was it Fulton Folk? Or
Fence power
Vance Power, was it from okay.
missing.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And the last set on definitions, provide a table listing the activity status of community facility and emergency service facility, rules in the zone chapters. Contact FENS and ask any view on the change recommendation to not add reference to emergency service facility to the definition of community facility. And FENS have the opportunity to table a statement within 10 working days, and will attach that FENS statement to the reply statement. Any further comments from reporting officers?
That'd be useful.
Then question Tuesday, what is the Environment Court definition of reverse sensitivity and compare with the KiwiRail definition of reverse sensitivity? And then there's a factual question sort of how many kilometres of water races and artificial channels are there in the Wairarapa? So how to supply that.
Distance from Wellington to Auckland, I think.
Partisan,
Yeah.
Queen Street. We don't know what number Queen Street in Auckland though.
Commissioner Flimmer, this is, I think, a question to cover that. Does including water races and artificial channels in the definition of surface water body have any unintended consequences? And what is the purpose of the setback rules in the proposed district plan? And just reference with what those rules are. What do they achieve over and above the natural resources plan? And are they appropriate as they apply to surface water bodies, which includes water races? Do the setback rules and proposed district plan duplicate other rules or requirements applying to water races and artificial channels? For example, rules in the natural resources plan and bylaws? And are there alternative ways to achieve the same outcomes? And in considering these questions, are the definition and associated rules still the most appropriate way to achieve the objectives in the proposed plan?
Very good.
Here, a track changes version of the definitions chapter showing deletions of references to national policy statements and national environmental standards.
Yes.
Provide to Eastleigh Limited in advance of Thursday, done, so they can address it. So that we could update that now from their verbal.
Yes.
I think is there still a question there?
The question was one that Ms. Robertson was pondering about whether national planning standard definitions should be exempt from that. I think you got a clear view from Mr. Marshall on that today.
I probably can delete question 17 because I think that's been actions
asked and answered.
And then the next question now number 17, why national planning standards definition is excluded from the recommendation, and what is the practical effect and what happens if they are changed.
Yes.
And then lucky last, is a plan change required to amend the definitions, or can the national planning standards, national policy statements or national environmental standards update the proposed plan definitions without a plan change? RMA Schedule 1 process.
Yes. And there might be a bit of, crystal ball gazing there. I just can't recall how the national planning standards implementation worked the first round. Was it a direction?
Direction that some had to be automatically included, but it had to go via a plan change.
Yes.
So I'm expecting we'll probably say something similar in an answer to that question.
Yeah.
That was just all.
Let me just check the rest of the panel. Is there any other questions that we've asked or should have asked that we'd like the authors to respond to and then write a reply?
I was going to ask a question on that. If we have to build in another chapter, what does that involve on the three waters?
Well, that sort of comes down to the question that we've added there about the three waters chapter being a complete code. Is it something we could simply adopt, or we would need to add to it?
Well, I'm just on, do you have to get people to submit on it?
No,
You don't?
that comes down to the issue of scope. There were two aspects of the Free Waters chapter that Zona added, being an introduction and definition of hydraulic neutrality, I think. That didn't appear in the original submission, and we're just asking the question is whether they are within scope.
We will.
David,
A question.
would it be useful to get a copy of the Wellington Council District Plan regarding the three waters?
We could attach that.
With access to that, so we could so you can see.
Just so that we can have a look and see what's the shape of it and how it aligns to their plan.
And that might help you answer question 10, Mr. Wesney.
It's because it's a living document, it's going to be hard to.
The Wellington, that part of the Wellington plan is finalised.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's Wellington City plan.
Yeah, but if we put it in, if we start again with the Three Waters chapter and it's a living document, it's going to be.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
Three waters
Hey,
done
isn't
well.
Mm, yeah.
Okay, so that would be our name.
Yeah.
I'd like to get a little bit, come back to the quarry issue, and maybe just get a little bit more about whether that needs to be treated as a strategic. We talked about it lunch, knowing that the quarry industry across the country is in a little bit of never level land. Maybe this is somewhere where we actually need to have another think about whether it's important. It's an important industry to such for the future of the development in the district. So
The actual national body hasn't got any, the quarry association or whatever you like to call it, hasn't actually got any set rules or guidelines, or a
They don't.
practice.
National
They don't
policy.
have a national policy statement.
No, statement.
exactly. So that's the problem we've got here, and if you
Yeah.
take this logically through and you look at the of energy sources and all this, none of those things are going to go ahead. We don't have a ready source and a guaranteed source of aggregate. Nothing goes ahead.
Yeah.
Because it is the building block of everything. Maybe that's where we need to think about it.
Mr. Wesney's response is going to be constrained by what submitters like Fulton and Hogan have requested.
Which they asked for it to be in the
But in addition to these specific questions that you've posed to us over the last 2 days, we'll also reflect on all the evidence we've heard
Yes.
and respond to that, including the quarry one, including what we heard today in terms of this chapter, or what was on referred to as an alternative of including it in the zone chapters. She seemed open to that.
Yes.
So these questions have come from us,
Correct.
and you will identify
We'll respond.
submissions that we've heard today
Yeah.
and reply to those as well. Okay.
So the last thing then is just time frame and process. So in minute panel, 15 working days, 3 weeks from the conclusion of the hearing to do that. And we're comfortable with that in terms of the detail that we can meet that timeframe. The other thing that came up was conferencing.
Yes.
And there were 2 sets, one on renewable electricity generation and the objectives for strategic direction. So I think the questions we've got there provide the basis for what we'll be conferencing on in terms of should there be those new objectives added. So I think that can be relatively straightforward conferencing and self-facilitated. And I think we can do, subject to availability, Mr. Foster and Mr. Matthews, should be able to achieve that within the next 3 weeks. So it can be incorporated into the reply statement. But the second one was the 3 waters and the strategic direction around Te Mana Otiwai and fresh water. Hearing the answer to your question, to the question you put to Regional Council there around the timing for the decision on the regional policy statement plan change being at this council meeting at the end of September.
Yes.
And notification of that decision sometime in October, maybe November. It feels premature to respond to these matters given how soon that decision would be available, and the questions you've asked us around the difference between having regard to and giving effect to at the decision stage would need to give effect to the decision there's no appeal. So my preference and advice would be if we can defer conferencing on the 3 waters chapter questions and the strategic direction questions around fresh water until after that decisions come out.
Yes.
And also in terms of the 3 waters chapters, effectively it's 2 primary rules, one relating to stormwater management, one relating to hydraulic neutrality. And this is the very first hearing, which is at a high level. We haven't, and you haven't heard evidence in considered submissions on other rules relating to zones or subdivision relating to stormwater. At this point, to me, those matters would be better dealt with pulled together later in the process once we're down at the rule stage. So, if you were comfortable with that, I just suggest a minute or brief, just acknowledging these issues have come up and that there's outstanding matters to respond to, but that they be paused until the subdivision hearing and they can be considered as part of that process.
It's February, is it?
That's in February next year.
Is there I certainly understand the decision to pause until after the Greater Wellington decisions are released, so then you understand what you're having regard to and what you're having to give effect to. Just explain to me how understanding the provisions in the subdivision chapter will assist the conferencing on that topic.
For these other submission points that raise how effective, raise how stormwater is managed.
Okay.
So that's my understanding. One of the key concerns of the Regional Council and the 3 waters that they're seeking the 3 waters chapter on is to better manage stormwater from urban development.
Yes.
So I think to me it's be preferable to look at that level of detail of provision as part of the subdivision chapter, where you're looking at similar types of rules.
Yes. Who are the parties that are involved at the strategic whole plan at this point? Is it that they're quite constrained, aren't they, in terms of numbers? That's Greater Wellington.
Genesis Energy.
Yes.
And Meridian.
Yes. Is there a risk that, well, will there be additional parties that will be involved at the subdivision stage?
Potentially.
Yeah.
That's also part of the thinking as well, that that there will be broader interests on stormwater management, which is related. It's all related to what the content of the 3 waters chapter Regional Council is seeking is.
When's the date for the subdivision hearing stream?
24th, 25th, 26th, 27th of February.
Okay. How would that how would the joint work conferencing work in relation to the right of reply response on that hearing screen?
Could be a two-stage process. Thinking just top of my head that there could be conferencing prior to the hearing, given we've heard evidence
Yes.
through this hearing.
Yes.
The question would just be then the role of other parties that may have submitted on the subdivision chapter.
Yes.
They're not party to this one.
That would have to occur after receipt of expert evidence.
Prior to the hearing.
Yeah, so 2 weeks prior to the hearing.
Yeah.
So that would be, so the date was the 24th.
24, 25, 27, 28.
Calendars, yeah.
They're the indicative ones at this stage.
So expert evidence would be due in around the 14th. So, okay. Well, that will give you a 10-day window of opportunity. And it might assist with your summary statements for that hearing also. Okay. Well, that sounds pretty compelling to me, panel. Would have been nice, whilst it would have been nice to have the issue dealt with squarely at the strategic, at the end of hearing stream 1. I can understand the interlinkages that Mr. Wesney's referred to. So I've got a mind to run with that, unless there's any objections.
No.
No. And we can draft a minute and get that out to the parties next week to let them know. Don't see Miss Foster online. She was online earlier. Yeah, if we can get that out early next week, we'll let everyone know that they won't be required in the next 10 working days for that. Except for of course, the renewable energy issue with Mr. Foster and Mr. Matthews. Okay. Well, that sounds good. Any other matters arising, panel? No? Nothing from you, Mr. Wesney? No? Nothing, no late mail, Ruth? Okay, that's fine. And they'll all be they'll be all uploaded onto the web page in due course. Thank you. Well, that just leads me to thank everyone for their attendance and the spirit of hearing's been conducted. Yeah, and who's going to do that? And I'd like to request either Joe or Kariana to take us out with the closing karakia.
Okay, just going to say, I've got this one up here. We all want to.
Happy for you to lead it. You all stand?
Whanga, kia whakahae rea te tapu, he waitea te ara, kia tūki whakataha ai, kia tūki whakataha ai.
Apologies, it's a bit of a glee.
Yeah, it is. It's the lights.
Thank you, everyone. The hearing
Thank you.
is adjourned. Officially. Oh, wow.